Welcome to Draw Process. I'm Ike, drawing pages of my comic books and processing about my development. Second to last page on my episode 2 of First Son and Sword. We are in the throne room, finally seeing the Lord Tsar, the evil emperor of this story. And on the last page, we had quite a bit of environment and the cityscape, the palace, inside and outside. And now we will see what's happening inside. So I'm starting off with my roughs, my thumbnails, right onto the 11 by 17 inch Bristol board. I think I just use a 300 series Strathmore, I believe, paper, if you were curious. There are better papers, but I've always been okay with this one. So what I'm looking for here is kind of a camera angle that's sort of behind his the emperor's hand on the side of his throne, looking ahead. So it's kind of an over-the-shoulder shot, but behind his kind of elbow or wrist, across his hand and his throne, towards the person that's approaching him to give him news. But I changed it. Instead of over the shoulder to be able to show the person, I decided to go more inductive and just go right at where you can see his knuckles and his knees only. So I've gone from, on the last page, the establishing shot that shows the throne only from behind, that's rather small. And now that's become the focus, the subject, and I'm breaking it down a bit. I'm starting with a close-up of just a piece of it, and then I'm going to show him fully here, his full figure sitting on the throne, and then in the third panel, a close-up of his face, working our way into this subject, this new subject. From there, I will go back to an over-the-shoulder shot from the throne to show who has approached him. So I've adjusted from that original sketch I was trying to do here to focus on the emperor first, because that's obviously the most interesting thing. That's what was in the last page. Start with that, really establish him in this moment. And I'm also designing him, working out how he looks right now too. And you'll notice that I'm going to try several different looks. I wanted him to look substantially human, but he's probably going to be 9 feet tall, perhaps, like maybe taller than Kurok, but not as bulky, and he's going to appear more human-like. And so I'm working out how will I make him look, how will I make his crown look. This adjustment is partly done because I want the camera to slightly be looking up at him. So we're going to see under his jaw a little bit. So I'm giving an up angle a bit on that. And I'm continuing to play with the shapes of his face. Do I make the eyes wide set? I got to be careful with that because it makes him more puppy-like. And I don't necessarily want him to have that kind of look. And so what I ultimately end up with came out much more like a skull, much more like bone-like. His nose appears like the nostril, opening on a skull. So I'm going for to make his body appear more hard bone. But give him kind of fleshy eyelids and lips or mouth area. The background, the palace that I established in the last scene, I am no longer putting a lot of work into that on these pages because the pillars are just becoming a little bit of dressing in the background. I made sure the perspective is pretty good on it as needed, but it's really just turning into lines. It's turning into texture and lines in the background. It's no longer meant to be clear. The idea is it's even out of focus. I can't make my lines out of focus. because they're rigid, clear lines in the way that I do my art. But I can treat them as if they're out of focus. So taking what is a detailed background with pillars and the vaulted ceilings and turn it into more like a pattern and a texture that still feels like there's something three-dimensional there. It's not completely a rigid pattern. It's not uniform and symmetrical. It seems to be the actual environment, and yet it's also abstracted. And I do that here for her. You'll see in this shot of the next thing, the focus goes from the emperor to who's about to speak to him. And this is a big reveal. It's the dragoness from the episode 1 who was serving King Croc. She has arrived here. She's carrying some kind of, plant piece in front of her, almost like some kind of offering, or maybe it's some kind of ritualistic thing. She's wearing garments that appear almost maybe ritualistic because they're just white. It doesn't seem like something she would wear. And she presents herself to the emperor. And you'll see here this over-the-shoulder shot of her with the emperor. Now they're together. We established the emperor, and then we establish her, and now they're together. I guess you could think of them like verse, chorus, this kind of thing. Pieces of it as it moves along. So here where it's over the shoulder shot, I realized I had erased and made a little change because the emperor on his throne, I wanted to make sure the horizon was low so we're looking up at him. And so I have it where, and I wanted to make sure the horizon was below his feet so that his feet become hidden by the block that he's seated on. The elevated block that the throne's on top of appears taller at this angle. It hides his feet from our view. And I wanted to do that because it helps establish this up angle. It makes him more imposing as a figure. Even though he's not huge in the panel, he's imposing. And then this last panel, I decided to leave a lot of room for words. And the words that I put here are not the ones I went with. I came up with something better, I believe. But I was kind of making some rough drafts on the words here. And this panel, I have the word balloon at the bottom right instead of top left or at the top of the panel. I have it at the bottom. She's bowing before him to offer this news. And so I have her hunched down, bowing, and her words coming out down. I don't know. There seems to be a default, a tendency for sequential storytellers to put these word balloons at the top of the panel, and I've never quite understood that. Why would the words do not need to have primacy? They're not more important than the art, and they shouldn't be rigidly in one place, it seems to me. Why not have a reason for where you put them? And that could be page flow, but it could also be, if someone is saying something under their breath while looking down, you might put the balloon down. Why would you bring it up above their head? Why not put it down and maybe even in front of the character, in front of their chest, or yelling at someone and you put the balloon like kind of pushing on the person being yelled at, surrounding them. I mean, there's so many things you could do with it, right? But the idea is that it's intentional. I'm coming in with a darker pencil and doing the final pencils. You'll see how I was able to get a more clear final choice on what's there and where it's there. one thing that came to mind with the design of the Emperor, the lizard man here, he has a longer rib cage than a human, even though he's very human-like. So he's got a longer torso and a longer rib cage. And so I decided that underneath the pecs, where the abdomen would start, the abs would start, I've made that a larger section. It's closer to the size of the chest, the pecs, at that next section, to show that that the rib cage opens up at a lower point, kind of show that it's longer. It just came to me in the moment, but I thought, I like that. I give that a longer section. And here's a great example of, the design I did has these gold-plated horns coming up out of the sides of his armrests on the throne. And yet from this angle, I'm going to have to put his hand on the armrest with his hand there, his knuckles there. And I need to show a few details, even though these horns are coming up, or teeth, whatever you want to call them, are coming up and blocking some of the view of his hand, and there's not much of a hand showing. You need to be able to tell it's a hand. And this is where, not that I did it wonderfully well, but this is where the confidence comes through more practice and more anatomy knowledge, more drawing skill in regards to the human figure, where you can have a very small amount of something visible showing, or a small amount of lines and detail added, and it's very clear what it is that's there. If my drawings were simplified to tube arms, just like, cartoony tube arms going to hands at the end, if you had someone's arm covering a big chunk of the panel, would you just have this big, these parallel curved lines taking up, a quarter of the page? Like, what is that? Being able to add the specificity to clarify what things are with very few lines, based on anatomy, based on knowledge. That is something you build over time. And again, I don't know that I would build it as much if I was just drawing, not comic books, drawing sequential storytelling like this. It forces me to do lots of camera angles and, capture different things than I would otherwise draw if all I did was draw in my sketchbook or draw from life, figure drawing or something. It's not the same as the complexity that you have to capture. And then to be able to take that and how far can you go with that? How much playing can you do? Like, how would you show motion, dynamics? Are you going to let the arm stretch, or like speed lines, or details of, let's say someone's, head banging. Are you going to do details of the head at multiple points across the page, as if time is compressed, as if, it's warped or something? All kinds of interesting things that you can do that also involve anatomy, involve like, what do you show? What little lines do you need? What little lines here indicate these are his knees, even though you can't see much of it. You'll see here that in the background, the frontmost columns here and the closest to you part of the background is pretty clearly defined. You can see the grid, you can see in the ceiling, you can see the columns. But as we move further back, I'm not worrying about being clear. There starts to be more of a mess of lines. It's not a clear grid anymore. It's just not defined as well. That's an example of things, turning more into a pattern as they move further away, more abstracted, more just a texture. But when it comes to the things mostly in the front, I'm looking for more clarity on what they are to establish what they are. That applies to a lot of things. I mean, even within the same figure, you could bring a lot of clarity to the parts of a figure that are closest to the camera, closest in view, or that are most important, like hands and faces, and things that are well lit. But then you could let the shadowed areas not have that clarity. Like here, and with the Emperor, I pretty much went in and defined his form, the lines and outlines and edges of muscle groups and so on. And then I added some hatching lines, some shading. But what if I only added clarity to the form where the light's hitting it? And maybe, defined the limiter, the edge where the light turns to shadow. But everything beyond that could become vague. It's not as rigidly defined. So I could let it lose clarity beyond, once it's in shadow. That can look really nice. You just define the pieces, certain pieces. Kind of like Mike Mignola working in the heavy black and white contrast. Only the things that are maybe white, the things that are lit, have he's making sure to put some details into that edge between light and dark. He's adding a little bit of texture lines to indicate texture or something on the lit part, but the rest is just solid black, no definition in it. You can do the same thing even if you're doing a style like mine, which I'm not doing too much of here, but you could, and I may do more of it in the future. But you could do the same thing in this style where anything that's in a shaded part is just hatched in with like a texture or just parallel shading lines. And you don't bother to clarify what is what within it. Everything within is just identical, the same as if it was solid black. And that can be interesting. It also is a little more work. It's potentially more work. It might save you work in some ways, but when it comes to inking on pencils that are not clearly defined yet, it is easier, I think, for most artists. It's easier to, and for myself here, it's easier to find the outline of pieces and parts and then go back and add some shading. That's just an organic process when something isn't fully defined yet. But if I fully defined the pencils ahead of time, then maybe I would approach it that way. Here, the Dragoness has 3 shadows coming off of her figure. That's not something that is done very often in comics. We forget to use multiple light sources, and if we do, we don't like to have multiple shadows coming off of a figure. So she's got the 2 shadows going behind her in a V that are not as dark, like there's more space between the lines, and they're less uniform, so they're kind of wobbling as they move. As they're behind her, like they're varying in width, even though her figure is more uniform in width. Like there's a lot of kind of organic, messy, chaotic quality to these lines. That's because the light source is fire. The fire around the throne is creating those shadows, which are going to be dancing a bit and not as strong. And then the one that's coming from the domed ceiling, the light, the sunlight, that's the shadow on the left of her figure and down on the ground on the left. How you handle light and shadow, I think, is super important. I think I mentioned last video a bit about, maybe it was the one before that, a bit about how you handle different materials, like these columns here on this inked panel I've threw some lines down that are not shadow, but reflection. On a shiny surface, the reflection is the mirror image. It's going to be going straight down, just like the columns are going straight up. It's not to the side like a shadow might be. So shininess, things that are bright or reflecting light, or or rough or smooth, whatever it is. How you handle textures and is interesting, but so much of that, maybe almost all of it, has to do with how you handle light and shadow. So you've got the light source, the main light source. There's light hitting other areas, but you got the primary light source, and then you've got the terminator edge, the edge of that light where you start to have the part of the object that is lit, that isn't lit by that primary light. That becomes the core shadow, like the darkest shadow, typically that's on the object. Because as you move away from that, you're moving to secondary lighting, light from other sources, or reflected light from the main source is bouncing back, hitting the object from the other side. So you see that in a sphere. When you shade a sphere, you'll see that, and that's like good practice for how are you going to shade all the objects in comic books. So shade some cubes and spheres and whatnot, cylinders, and that'll help you with your comics. Then there's the shadow on the ground, the shadow cast by the figure. It's going to be darkest when the object, at the base, at her base of her dress there, where the object and the ground are closest together, you're going to have the darkest shadow. And then as it moves away, it's going to kind of fade out. That's the same concept as on the object, where the darkest shadow is where the light stops hitting, the edge of that terminator, the edge of the light, where it turns to shadow. Same idea on the ground plane. The shadow's darkest right there at that edge, where it meets the object. And then there's more secondary light. And how do you capture that? If you make shadows a really clear edged line, solid black, and the shape, the outline matches the figure, then you're implying that there's no secondary light at all. And that the primary light is incredibly bright, right? Casting a very harsh shadow on the ground. And that can be a cool style, but can you adjust mood? If you use that style, if you do it that way only, then you're not able to convey other things. And you're going to rely, I guess we could say, solely rely on color and value through like the coloring added or shading added. But let's say the colors that are added, you're relying on that to apply the mood, because you're not altering the mood with what you're drawing. You're not conveying different lighting conditions, different, which is a way to convey mood, right? But there's a few ways to deal with that. Again, if you're using a solid line, like stark contrast style, then you could let the shadow, the edge of the shadow get warped, get less accurate to the figure. It could move towards becoming more geometric, or it could move towards becoming more rounded. But in some sense, warping that shadow will imply that it's not a firm edge, even though you've drawn it as a perfectly firm edge, because we're talking about, drawing in that style. So there's ways to do that. But if you're not using a solid black and white style, as I'm doing here, you can do that with the hatching lines. You can let the lines be darker, closer together, closer to the figure, and further apart, thinner, and so on, further from the figure. And Here is the finished page and the colors. They're similar to the palette through the comic, but there's some changes. Things are moving towards green more than they have the whole book, but that's part of establishing the mood for this, establishing the new environment. And there it is, finished. I feel like I kind of rambled on these ideas around lighting, shading, and whatnot. Maybe there's a few nuggets in there for you, I hope. Useful things. They're interesting to me. I've got one more page, and my mind is going towards writing, which is perfect. It's perfect timing. I'll need to be writing the next story after this one. See you next week for the final page.